So this is a lecture about choice. This is what I study. I study choice. I've studied it in animals. I've studied it in people. I think about how people make choices, maybe a little bit about the physiology that goes on while they're making those choices, when those choices are irrational, when they're predictable. So we're going to go through some of the theories about choice. I kind of like this issue because I like the way people sometimes don't choose for their own best interest. This is there's a really good TED Talk by Barry Schwartz. You might want to look it up. I read his book, The Paradox of Choice. This is some really interesting things. He talks about how in a society where we get more and more choices, sometimes we become less and less satisfied with the choices we make in a very predictable way, which can really reduce the quality of somebody's life. So he says, you go into a supermarket and you're going to go and get yourself some cereal or some mustard. Look at this choice. You choose one of these mustards, and his basic thesis is you don't like it very much. You don't think it tastes very good because the idea of all those other possibilities, one of those other mustards must have been better. If we have fewer choices, we tend to like the things we choose. That's why this is a paradox. We think we live in a world in the United States where it's all about choice. Everything is about giving us more and more choices on health care, on the food that we eat. But what he is saying in his book, which I'm just barely summarizing here, is that sometimes more choice doesn't give you more freedom. It actually constricts your freedom because you're overwhelmed by those choices. So what are you going to do, when you walk in and you have to choose pairs of pants? It used to be that if you wanted some jeans, you would just get the kinds of jeans that they had to offer at the store, maybe a few different brands, a few different colors. Now it's everything. It's about the fit. It's about the look. It's about whether they are acid washed or stone washed. This, he says, produces kind of a problem. And we also get, here's the great psychological term, paralysis by analysis. In other words, we think so much about these choices that we end up not really liking the choices we make, or we have a difficult time spending a lot of our time and energy making those choices. So this is one of the kinds of curves that he shows in this book. So you look over here and he says positive emotions. These are positive emotions. These are negative emotions. And the more choices we get, there's a point at which it flattens out. In other words, maybe a few choices are nice. It's nice to have a few choices. But then you start having a lot more choices, and the good feelings from those choices really don't increase that much. But the bad feelings of the choices, of all the choices we have to make, decrease. And if you look at the combination of this curve over here, you see that there is a diminishing return, a point where too many choices produce really bad emotions. I highly recommend you read his book and at least watch his TED Talk if you can. So let's go into some basic theory of what influences choice. We've kind of gone over this before. We know that amount of reward influences choice. The amount of reward we get if one option has more reward than the other. It's chosen by a certain degree. And some of the measures that we use in both humans and non-human animals, we might just have choice probability. Given two options, what's the likelihood of this animal choosing option A over option B? One thing that I wrote a paper on, a couple papers on, is how quickly they respond. If they have two options, how fast do they respond to those two options? We call that the latency or speed, latency of response. We can also look at speed of running. Maybe it's running down a runway. How quick? That will tell us the relative value of two options. And another thing is you might have two options that have different rewards. You let the animal learn about those two options, and then both options don't produce any reward at all. That's an extinction. Well, how often, how long does that animal continue to try out those options before it stops behaving? That tells us a little bit too about the relative value of the two options. Relative value is really dictating choice. Okay? So if option A has 5 niblets of food and option B has 2 niblets of food, what is the relative preference? It might have a lot to do with the relative value of the two options. So this is just looking at running speed with an animal, okay? And this is running speed over trials. And when the animal was getting 10% sugar water, which is delicious, he had a very high speed of running, really got into a high asymptotic level of running. 5% wasn't too bad, but it doesn't run as fast. 2.5%, he runs even slower. And you can actually compare, if you gave two options, what would be the relative choice of those two options. You might see something in terms of how fast it runs, its relative speed. So animals learn about the rewards offered by two stimuli. This is what I'm talking about. So when two stimuli are presented together, that's known as a simultaneous choice, as opposed to two options given one after the other. That's successive, one after the other. So oftentimes in experiments that I run with animals, I'll give them option A, let them deal with it. How much food do you get? Then that goes away. Option B, the animal picks B, and maybe there's a certain reward to that or a delayed reward. The animal learns about that. Then I'll follow it up with a choice, A or B. That's a very common way of doing it. So you might ask percentage of choice after they've learned about these, gives us that relative preference. You can have situations, and these are what I typically run when I'm running animals, is they get two options, they get one choice, and then the trial is over. Okay? Option A and option B are presented, they make their choice, the trial is over, everything stops, we wait a little while, and then we might present option A, then option B, and then it's over, and then choice of option A and B. That's known as discrete trials. I did this with starlings, I did this with honeybees. Another common way of looking at relative preference, which is an indication of choice, is you just let them A and B to be there all the time. A and B options. Maybe it's a lever A and lever B. Or maybe it's a key light for a bird to peck. Key light that's blue and key light that's red. A and B. And those are associated with different rates of reinforcement, different delay to reinforcement, and they're there for the animal can respond as much as he wants to either of them. That's known as free operant. It doesn't end. The trials don't end. So this is what I did with my honeybees when I worked with honeybees. I had two options. I had a blue one and a yellow one. The blue might have, 5 microliters of sugar water, and the yellow might have 10 microliters. Okay? Or the blue might have 40% concentration of sugar and the yellow 10% concentration of sugar, or whatever. And then I would allow the bee to come in, fly around, and make its choice. It would drink from that one. I would mark down its choice. I would make sure it experienced the other one so he knows what's there. Fly to the next window, makes a choice again. And I look at the animal's relative choice over the course of several hours. Fun little animal to work with. Free operant, we get into what are known as schedules of reinforcement. Now, if you take a course on learning, you're going to get a lot about schedules of reinforcement, especially if you get into areas that are dealt with by B.F. Skinner. But we're going to look at these briefly so you can kind of look at relative choice, especially when it gets to theories of relative choice. So there's one thing called a variable ratio schedule. This is the animal or person has to do a behavior a certain amount of times. It doesn't have to wait, just a certain amount of times, and on average the person or animal will get a reward. You just don't know when. It's variable. So a slot machine, for example, is a variable ratio schedule. So let's say I have money in a slot machine and I press the button and it spins and I don't win anything. That's trial 1. I press the button, I spin, I don't win anything. 2. Spin 3. Spin 4. I not get anything. Also on the 5th one, I get money back. Well, they're not going to have it, so it's every time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 win. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 win. That would be a fixed ratio. Okay, if that was the case, you would just sit there and you would have somebody else go to win, then you push them away. In this case, you don't know. Maybe you get money back on average every 5 spins. Well, that could go like this. You could spin it twice and get money. You could spin it 8 times and get money. You could then spin it 10 times and get money, then 2 times, then 3 times, then 5 times, and you just don't know when. It's a way of keeping a very high level of performance. So a variable ratio of 10 is on average the person or animal has to respond 10 times on average to receive a reward. But there's also what's known as intervals, and this is going to be important when we talk about Herrnstein's matching law. This is a certain amount of time must pass before the animal can press the lever, press the key to get reward. Okay? And this, in a variable case, the animal presses the key, maybe it's a bird, he pecks the key, he gets reward. Then, if it's on a variable schedule of, let's say, 120 seconds or 2 minutes, on average 2 minutes have to pass before the animal is allowed to press the key to get reward again. Now, this might be the case that the animal presses the key and gets food, and then 110 seconds go by, and then after 110 seconds, if he happened to press the key, he'd get food. Well, in the next trial, after that, 140, 130, then a 90, then 110, then 120, then 125. As long as over the course of the animal's experience, the amount of time it must wait to respawn to get food is 120 seconds. That's known as a VI, or variable 120. So let's go back to choice. Here we are, there's a starling right there. And there are 2 options, blue and red. And both of them are on the same schedule, variable interval of 120. That means, on average, 120 seconds must pass after the animal responds and gets food for the animal to respond to get another food. And you ask, how does the animal distribute its performance to each option? How often does he peck on this one? How often? And how often does he peck on that one? That will give you a relative performance. Now, if they both offer the same amount of reward, in this case, the amount of reward they would get from each option would be on average 1 thing of food every 2 minutes, and that would give us a 30 niblets of food per hour. 1 every 2 minutes, 30 per hour, that would be the rate. If they have the same rate, the animal will press the blue key and the red key about equally often. So this gets us to one of the big theories of choice, and something I've had to write about and deal with a lot, and that's by a guy named Herrnstein. Herrnstein's matching law. Sometimes it's pronounced Herrnstein. Herrnstein's matching law. And the matching law says that it's a very simple idea, so don't get bogged down with all of these kinds of formulas. It's just a basic idea. The animal will distribute its behavior to 2 options, either in choice or something, based on the relative amount of food it gets from each option. So, the response to A relative to B is equal to how often it gets food, or frequency of reward, from A compared to B. This is a ratio formula, A over A plus B. So let me give you a few examples. Let's follow this through. We've already done this one. The animal's on a VI 120, A and B, red and blue, with the frequency that they get food is 30 per hour. 1 every 2 minutes is 30 per hour. Okay? So 30 divided by 30 plus 30, 30 divided by 60 is 50. The animal will respond to A 50% of the time. Well, let's look at this one. The animal's on a VI 90 with red and a VI 180 with blue. It gets food every minute and a half here and gets food every 3 minutes here. Which one do you think it would like? Would it like A or B? Well, it's going to like A more because it gets food more often. Well, how? It gets 40 niblets of food per hour, 40 pellets of food per hour, if it gets fed every 90 seconds on average. 180 is 3 minutes. 180 seconds is 3 minutes. How many times does 3 minutes go into 60 minutes or an hour? It goes 20 times. It gets 20 per hour. 40 divided by 40 plus 20, 40 divided by 40 plus 20 is 66.6%. So the matching law says that of all the times the animal pecks a key, it will peck A 66% of the time and peck B about 33% if matching law holds. Final example. VI 72 gives them 50 pellets of food per hour. VI 360, which is 6 minutes, gives them 10 per hour. 50 divided by 10 plus 50. 50 divided by 60 is 83%. The animal should distribute its behavior or performance to this one, to A, 83% of the time if matching holds. This graph is oftentimes used. Okay? So this is the relative frequency, relative behavior. Relative frequency of food, relative behavior. These are the matching principles. And what I've done with my work, and some other people have done with their work, is they look at how closely frequency of reward, in my case I use food, for animals I use points for people, and relative choices, A and B. We can do matching with a lot of things. We can do matching with just how much time the animal spends in each places. Okay? So let's look at this little animal. He gets 10 per hour here. If he comes to this dish, he gets 5 per hour here if he goes to this dish. And we simply draw a line and say, how much time are you spending here? And how much time are you spending there? Let's watch the animal again. How much time? We put a stopwatch. When he's over here, we have one stopwatch going. And when he's over here, we have another stopwatch going. And we find that the animal responds or is heading in this area 66% of the time. 10 divided by 10 plus 5. 10 divided by 15. So what are the kind of behaviors we see with matching? Well, we see relative choice. We see relative amount of time spent. We see ratio of responding. We even see latency. And that's a little bit more complicated because we're looking at how long it takes before the animal actually reacts. And that will be a good measure of its relative preference of two options. So matching reward parameters, ratio, amount of reward, delay of reward, probability, all of these things, if two options, let's look at probability for just a second. Two options, blue and red. If he pecks red, then there's a probability of 50% that he's going to get food. Sometimes he gets it, and sometimes he doesn't. It's a 50% probability. If he pecks the other one, the other color, maybe there's a 25% probability. He only gets food there 1 in 4 times. How often does he choose one over the other? A over A plus B. Okay, now we're going to get into another issue that I kind of like. This is known as contrast effect. Choices are not always dictated by the absolute value of something. It's always relative to something else. It's always relative to other expectations, relative to what other people are getting. These are the subjective value of reward is based on really a state of mind of where you are. So if you walk into a store and the store says, well, this thing is normally, $80, but it's 50% off. Whether you like it or not, in your brain you're saying, well, think of the money I'm saving. I'm saving $40. As opposed to if that object was just $40. You're going to like that object a lot more if it says it used to be 80 and now is 40 than if it just said it was 40 all the time. This is a contrast effect. We see this really strongly in animals. We see this really strongly in humans. It's kind of funny. And in fact, in Barry Schwartz's book, there's this great anecdote where there was this company and they wanted to sell a coffee maker, right? So they had 2 coffee makers in this magazine. This magazine you could go to and order. They had one that was $50 and one that was $20. And they weren't selling any of the $50 coffee makers. They just weren't selling very many of them. They wanted to sell a $50 coffee maker. So they went to a firm, and the firm says, here's what you do. You put a coffee maker in there that's $200. I mean a fancy coffee maker. And they said, no one's going to buy the fancy coffee maker for $200. They said exactly right. They won't buy it. But there'll be 3 coffee makers for people to choose from. There will be a really expensive one, a middle one, and then a really cheap one. And what happened is people started buying the $50 one, went way up. Hardly anybody bought the $200 one, but that wasn't the point. The point was that the $50 one seemed a good value in contrast to the really expensive one. So I have to admit, I do this sometimes. As a hobby, I do pottery. It's just my fun. I like to do it. And sometimes, every once in a while, I'll go and I'll sell my pottery at some craft fair. Well, what I like to do is I have my little mugs and my little bowls, and these aren't too expensive, and maybe a couple of nice jars. And then I bring a couple nice big giant pieces. $400 for this giant vase that I made. I don't want to sell the giant vase. I like the giant vase. I'll keep the giant vase. Put the giant vase next to the little mug, and more mugs sell. Sorry, it's just the way it works. I feel bad. So sometimes we have a positive contrast. This is known as a positive incentive contrast. In this case, if the reward is greater than expected, we see a boost of performance. A boost of performance. If you expect something and it's actually better than you expected, you see an increase in productivity in both animals and people. Let me give you an example. Somebody makes $40,000 a year. That's what they make. They make $40,000 a year. And at the end, the boss comes up and says, you've done a great job. Here's $5,000. Wow, that is so much more than I expected. I thought this was a $40,000 a year job. I made $45,000. This is a wonderful bonus. We see this increase in performance. It's much better performance than if you said your salary is $45,000. We're going to pay you $45,000. You don't get any bonuses, but you get $45,000. Start them at $40,000, give them the bonus, and you get better performance. However, sometimes, and this is a really bad thing, is if you have high expectations and those expectations aren't met in both animals and people, you get frustrated, you get a negative contrast or a negative incentive contrast. And we see this in businesses as well. Let's say a business is not doing so well. Okay, this happens. And somebody was making $60,000 a year, and you say the business isn't doing so well. I'm sorry, we have to cut your salary. Now you make $50,000 a year. Well, you get a real drop in performance, even compared to people in the same position making $50,000. It's all relative. It's all relative to what others are getting, or to what you're getting, or what you used to get. So when I was putting this lecture together, I started thinking about this experiment. I love this experiment. It cracks me up. Okay, we got 2 monkeys here, right? We got this little monkey, and we got this monkey. And what the monkeys have to do is they have to give this researcher a rock. If you give them a rock, you get a treat. Now, this monkey gets cucumber. Cucumber's fine. Cucumber is tasty. I'll eat a cucumber, but it's not a grape. That one gets a grape. Grapes are delicious. Monkeys love grapes. Little piece of trivia for you. Monkeys love themselves the grapes. So watch what happens with this monkey. He's going to give her the rock, and he's going to get cucumber. Okay? Okay? I gave you my rock. Here's your cucumber. Oh, I love it. He eats it up. Nom, nom, nom. Love me the cucumber. Okay, this guy has to go find his rock. Gives him the rock, and he gets a grape. Look at that other monkey. What the hell did you just get? You just got... Okay, I get a grape this time. I get a grape. Yay, I get a grape. What the hell? What is that crap? That is one frustrated monkey. Okay? This monkey was happy to get his cucumber. Happy as a clam to get his cucumber. He was hungry. But when he found out what the other one got grapes. And as soon as he got grapes, that monkey gave him a rock, got the cucumber, didn't want it, chucked it at this person, and then grabbed the fence. Okay? That's a contrast effect. So let's look at that with an experiment. Let's say we have this rat, and he runs down. There he goes, running down, and he gets himself some food, and he eats the food, and it's a nice, tasty, yummy food. Okay, we have two groups. One gets 20 pellets of food, and one gets 5 pellets of food. That's the experiment. Record the running speed down the alley. After 10 trials, both groups were given extinction. In other words, this group got 20 and then 0, and this group got 5 and then 0. The question is, here's the question, how persistent are the animals in still running down the runway? Which group do you think will run the most trials with the most speed after getting 20 or after getting 5? Now, one might think this group got a whole bunch more reward. He would, oh man, this is the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to run down there. I mean, if we're just talking about Thorndike's theoretical law of effect, he has a very strong association. But if we think about contrast, which animal is dropping the farthest? That's right. Okay? So, 20 pellets, you get this high speed of feet per second. It's high speed. But as soon as you give them extinction, that animal drops down to no performance faster than this animal who got 5, who's not the fastest animal in the world, but when he goes from 5 to 0, he still persists longer. Okay, that is we call it a frustration effect, and we see this in business, we see this in employees all the time. This kind of thing. Animals who receive a high reward extinguish more quickly than those receiving a lower reward. It's a little paradoxical that one who got tons and tons and tons of food, or a person who gets tons of money and all of a sudden now doesn't get as much or doesn't get any, stops the performance. This is a negative contrast between getting a good reward and no reward. That is higher or is greater in the high reward group because it drops further. The contrast between 20 and 0 is greater than the contrast between 5 and 0. And this can cause what we call frustration, which is an innate response to unrealized anticipation of a reward. An unrealized anticipation of a reward produces frustration. Frustration interferes with performance. And then we get into something that has great application for dealing with kids, for dealing with, especially with kids who might be on the autism spectrum, to deal with kids in classroom. And this is known as the partial reinforcement effect or extinction effect. So let's look at it with animals and then we'll talk about it with humans. So let's say that this animal, top animal runs down and he gets a niblet of food. And let's say he gets it every time. This is a constantly rewarded animal. He gets food every time. This animal doesn't get food every time, the bottom one. Okay? Back him up. But he does occasionally. He gets reward occasionally. Maybe he's on a variable ratio schedule. Okay? And what we find is that an animal who's on a variable ratio of 1, in other words, it's not really a ratio schedule, it's a constant reward. It gets rewarded every single time, every performance. That animal starts off doing pretty well, but extinguishes very quickly compared to an animal who's maybe on a VR5, which he had to respond 5 times on average to get food, but he persists longer. He continues to run down to the end of the runway. That other animal stops rather quickly. Even though this group, the VR1, got rewarded every time. If there was 100 trials, he got 100 rewards. Hey, let's see if you can figure out this. If this animal got 100 trials on a VR5, how many rewards did it get? That's good, 20, yes, because it got rewarded on average every 5 times. 5 times 20 is 100. He didn't get nearly as many food rewards as the VR1 did. He got rewarded every time, but he persists longer. The partial reinforcement extinction effect, very powerful. There is a less difference between training and extinction. They're very similar. I'm used to not getting reward. Animals that were partially reinforced occasionally run down to the end and get nothing. That's frustrating. That's frustrating. But that animal had learned to persist because sometimes he starts the runway. Sometimes he runs down, frustrated, and he gets reward. He's rewarded for persisting through the frustration, through the being in that box and not getting something and then getting something. The other animal got rewarded every time. He never dealt with frustration. Is he frustrated in Extinction? Is he upset? Oh yeah, he's terribly upset. He used to get reward. He's a hungry animal. He's never been taught to persist in the face of frustration. It's very important in understanding child development. Work in schools. I mean, what we find is that, humans and non-human animals, they work very good, much better, when they're put on a variable schedule of reward. I'm saying when kids do their homework and they don't get this overt, oh, here's money, let's go out for a treat every single time, they do much better because they persist that good behavior when there is no reward. And that's really what life is about. I mean, did your parents call you up every night? Did you do your homework? Did you study for Dr. Shapiro's test? Did you do that? No, nobody's looking at you right now. And the question is, do you have that expectations of reward? I see this sometimes when I go maybe into Walmart, or somewhere. I always give this example because it's kind of funny, You walk into Walmart and a little kid says, to mom, give me a toy, I want a toy. And the mom says, no, you're not getting a toy. Okay, well, there's trial number 1, and the child didn't get anything. Trial number 2, the kid says for the second time, no, I really want a toy. You need to give me a toy. And the mom says, no toy. Give me a toy. I'm getting upset. No toy. Give me a toy. Give me a toy. Ah! And the kid's screaming, right? And then the mom goes, okay, here's your toy. What has the child learned to do? The child had learned to persist through frustration. So this can be a good thing if they're persisting through the frustration of failure at trying something that they're doing, like sports and schoolwork, and this is good. But it also can produce really bad behavior, because what has that child learned? The child has learned that all I have to do is keep screaming and persist, and I'll get it. Persist through that frustration. So my rule when it comes to taking my kids out is before we enter Walmart or shopping or the toy store or whatever, I say, today I'm going to get them a toy, or today I'm not. And I stick by it. You got to stick by it. And what happens is you walk in, you go to them, you go get yourself a toy. Boom. It's over. They get themselves a toy. They come in one day, hey, can we get a toy today? No, today is not a toy day, And they know that that's it. There's the scream all you want. You're not getting a toy or a candy today. So that seems to work pretty well. Now, this gets into a really broader picture here. A debate about kids winning and kids getting rewarded all the time. And I kind of go back and forth on this. Kids, everybody wins. Everybody wins at the game, and everybody wins at the things that they try. It's not such a good thing to do. Failure is a good thing for children. Be careful about this. I'm not talking when a kid fails, you go, look at you, you're a failure. I'm talking about teaching children how to persist through it, how to accept a failure, how accept the fact that you tried. You may even tried your best, and you still came up short. You still lost the game. You still didn't get your math test the score you wanted. Now the question is what do you do? Are you angry? Yes. Are you frustrated? Yes. What do you do? Do you go back and study even harder next time? Yes. You study harder next time. You study again. You do well. You saw that you learned a valuable lesson as a child, that if you persist through that frustration, that success can come. If they win every time, you don't get to learn that lesson. So sometimes it's not such a bad thing to see kids not get their way, not succeed, have somebody win and they don't. It's about teaching them how to persist through those problems. Okay, a little bit of brain stuff. A little brain stuff here at the end. The brain is trying its hardest to figure out what succeeds and what does not. I mean, that's one of the main functions of the brain. How in the future can I succeed? Do I meet my expectations? If not, what do I do about it? So we get into some different areas of the brain that communicate, areas of the brain. So we've talked about the ventral tegmental area, the mesotelencephalic dopamine system, very much activated with the expectation of reward. very highly activated when there's a lot of uncertainty of getting the reward. So if they're going to get reward every time, this doesn't really involve itself. Well, this is a predictable environment. I don't need to update the system. But if it's unpredictable and rewards the brain loves that. The mesotelencephalic dopamine system loves the slot machine, you know. Then we get to an area I don't think we've talked about before, and that area is called the anterior cingulate cortex. There it is right up there. Now this is getting information from the dopamine cells, from the mesotelencephalic dopamine system. A mistake in expectations produces a burst of activity in this area. This is the area that goes, okay, wrong. You thought you were going to get this, you didn't get it, you were wrong. Communicates really well with those dopamine cells to update the system. What was different? How did this not meet your expectations? Because I want you to succeed better in the future. And then we get an area called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Again, these are all intercommunicating, but it really does get a lot of information from the emotional centers of the brain. So if you make a mistake or you're not doing the right behavior, a lot of times your autonomic nervous system, your emotional nervous system, and the part of your brain that deals with emotion is telling you that. The skin response is different. The heart rate is different. It's trying to warn you you're making the wrong mistake. You know, we really actually have a name for that. We call that a gut feeling, right? Oh, I have a gut feeling about this. Well, that is the body, sometimes at a level that's not conscious, telling you, okay, you're making an error. You're about to make an error. Let me give you an example of this. If you play a card game, there's this card game, and there's two decks of the card game. It's called the Iowa Gambling Task. I don't need you to know that, but there's two decks. You choose from A, you choose from B. If you choose from A, you sometimes get a very high reward, and sometimes you get a low reward. And if you choose from B, it's not so high and not so low, right? You're trying to figure out which deck you're going to get the most points from, the most money from. Turns out deck B is the better one. On average, you're going to do better with deck B, but it takes a while for you to learn that. Unless you sit there with a spreadsheet in your head, you're trying to figure this out. Well, it takes you maybe about 50 trials. 50 trials to really say, I'm sticking with B. But about 25 trials, we find the autonomic nervous system does not like it when you choose from A. You're still choosing from A because you haven't figured it out yet, but your heart knows it. Right? Your gut knows it. Your skin response knows it. We start seeing a difference in an autonomic emotional response to making a bad decision. And what's happening is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is dealing with that information and trying to incorporate it into actual conscious decisions. People with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex can't make decisions well, can't make choices well, can get bogged down by logic. Their brain, they might be very logical, have a nice IQ, they just can't make decisions because they're not allowing the emotions to help them along. I'm going to choose a roast beef sandwich or turkey sandwich. I can't decide. You weigh out all the goods and bads of both of them. Where you and I, without damage, would go, I feel like roast beef today. I feel like it. Just going with my gut, you know? So people with ventromedial damage to the prefrontal cortex are mired in logical thought, but terrible at decision making, and they don't do well in that game where you have to switch decks, where you have to go from A to B, you have to figure it out. They can't make those because the emotions aren't telling them. And this leads to what is known as the somatic marker hypothesis. And this is basically what it's trying to say. You have parts of your body, your somatic system, that gives you markers of when you make a decision or when you're about to make a decision. Those markers are skin response, heart rate response, autonomic responses. Those are somatic markers. You're about to make a bad decision. You have an autonomic reaction in your body that sends a signal that's really incorporated in your ventromedial portion of your prefrontal cortex is saying that wasn't a good decision. And so it's really that old brain trying to tell that new brain about the new forms of their decision making. So skin conductant response, right, precedes poor or risky decisions that aren't really in your best interest. And so we work with this idea in my own lab and the somatic marker hypothesis. Okay, so you frustrated? You frustrated that this is over? Yeah, me too. All right.